I never told my son what I earned. Not once in 35 years did I volunteer that I bring home $40,000 every month. To Lucas, I was the woman in the sensible shoes who left before dawn and returned after dark. The woman who stretched leftovers into meals, who fixed a loose button with the thread I kept in a chipped teacup, who could make a simple apartment feel tidy and warm. Maybe a clerk, maybe an assistant, someone unremarkable. He never asked. I never corrected him. That suited me. I was raised to keep the loudest parts of life on the inside. Where I come from, dignity is carried quietly, and silence can be both shield and crown. So I kept my truth folded like a letter in a drawer. For almost 2 decades, I've been a senior executive at a multinational firm. I've negotiated deals with commas in the wrong places. Too many zeros to count at a glance. I run operations across 5 countries, manage budgets that ripple into tens of thousands of paychecks, and sign contracts measured in millions. I've done it for years, and I've done it without flinching, but I never hung any of it on the wall. I never wore it on my wrist. I never let it enter our dinner table conversation. I stayed in the apartment I could afford back when Lucas was small, and the rent was a dare we kept winning. I carried the same leather handbag until its corners went soft and the handle begged for mercy. I shopped the sale rack and cooked what was fresh and cheap, stashed every spare dollar where it could quietly multiply. Rich in silence, wealthy without ceremony. That is the kind of power I trust. The kind that doesn't need applause. On a Tuesday afternoon, my phone lit up with Lucas's name. It was late enough for the office to be loud with the end of day hum, early enough that I still believed ordinary things might happen. He sounded different when I answered. Careful, like he was tiptoeing across thin ice. "Mom, I need a favor," he said. "Maya's parents are visiting from abroad. First time here. They want to meet you. We're having dinner Saturday at a nice place. Can you come?" Something in his tone set a small stone rolling down the mountain inside me. It wasn't a son inviting his mother. It was a man rehearsing. I could hear him measuring me against people I hadn't yet met. "Do they know anything about me?" I asked. Silence stretched thin across the line. Then, "I told them you work in an office, that you live alone, that you're simple." There it was. Simple. A word that can feel like a kindness if it means uncomplicated, and a knife if it means small. To Lucas, it had always been a compliment. To others, it could be an apology. "All right," I said. "I'll be there." After he hung up, I made a slow circle around my living room. The couch I bought secondhand when Lucas was in high school. The small TV on a narrow stand I didn't love but never thought to replace. The framed photograph of Lucas on the day he moved into his first apartment. The one I took when my hands wouldn't stop shaking, because I could hardly believe he was real and grown and standing in a doorway that was his. No expensive art. No gleaming white surfaces. Nothing glossy for visitors to gasp at. What happened next wasn't a plan so much as a decision that rose up in me fully formed. If my son wanted the mother he believed me to be, he would get her. I would wear the humility he showed on my behalf like a costume. I would go to that restaurant as the woman they imagined. Broke, knave, a touch lost. And I would watch them show me who they were when faced with someone they thought could never repay their kindness, never bite back. Because I had a suspicion about Maya's family. I had met shadows of them before, all pearls and posture and the brittle confidence of people who have never stood in line at a clinic or counted cash underneath fluorescent lights. My instinct rarely misses. I wanted to know, not secondhand, not from stories. I wanted to see and listen in person. Saturday arrived like the beginning of a performance and I costumed myself accordingly. I chose the most shapeless dress in my closet, a washed-out gray that wrinkled if you looked at it too hard. Worn shoes with softened soles. No jewelry. Hair scraped into a ponytail I could have tied with the elastic from a bunch of scallions. Canvas tote frayed at the hem. In the mirror, I looked forgettable. Which was the point? The restaurant's entrance glowed like a small theater lobby. A doorman in white gloves. Fresh flowers already losing their perfume under the weight of the air conditioning. Tables that were more suggestion than furniture. Glossy surfaces set with knives that could cut through the numbers on the bill. The kind of place where menus are heavy and prices are not invited to the page. I paid the taxi, drew a breath, and stepped inside. Lucas saw me first. He had a suit on I hadn't seen before, something dark and precise. His shoes were polished to a shine that told me he'd done it himself, because there wasn't a speck of dust along the seam. My boy. He smiled, then faltered, then reclaimed the smile like a dropped spoon. Mom. You made it. I told you I would. Maya stood beside him, beautiful in a cream dress that loved her body. She kissed my cheek with politeness and the practiced cool of someone who has learned to move gracefully through rooms that aren't hers. Hi, Elena, she murmured. This is my mother and father, Vivienne and Dominic. They were seated like minor royalty who'd wandered off a yacht. Vivienne wore emerald silk and the kind of diamonds that hold their own light. Her face was careful in the way faces become when they have been watched too closely, too often. Charles. No, not Charles. Dominic. Dominic wore a gray suit tailored the way a knife is. His watch gleamed but not his eyes. Their posture belonged to people who never have to crane their necks to be heard. I approached like the woman I'd chosen to be. Smaller steps than my legs wanted. A timid smile. I reached for Vivienne's hand. She let me hold it for a heartbeat. Cool fingers, a cool face. A pleasure, she said, the syllables smooth and buttered. And you, Dominic added, as though it cost him nothing to say it, and perhaps it did. No one offered me the chair. I tugged it out myself and sat, careful not to bump the stemware. The menus arrived like props. French names unfurled across the pages. I let my gaze slide over them without looking, as though I could read them. Then lifted my eyes as if asking for permission I didn't need. Would you like help with the menu? Vivienne asked, smiling with only half her face. Yes, please, I said, softening my voice until even I almost believed it. I'm afraid I don't know how to pronounce these dishes. She sighed prettily and flagged a waiter. Something simple for Elena, she said, as though my name rhymed with budget. Nothing too indulgent. A sentence like that doesn't disappear. It hovers. It sinks. Vivienne spoke first, in that practiced rhythm that rises from a life of recounting triumphs. Their flight. The suite. The car. The boutique where she found exactly what she wanted, as if the universe had been holding it off the rack just for her. The dinner they had in Dubai last year that still sits in her voice like a jewel she can't stop touching. She glanced at me after each anecdote, not to share the joy but to assess the sparkle in my eyes. Was I dazzled? Was I grateful to be here to witness what a rich life looked like when it was brave enough to be seen? How wonderful, I said occasionally. That sounds lovely. And it did, in the way displays can be lovely even when they don't move you. And you? She asked finally. What do you do, Elena? I work in an office, I said, not meeting her eyes long. Paperwork. Filing. Whatever is needed. Administrative, she repeated, filing me too. That's honest work. All work is dignified if it's honest. I murmured, and let the conversation flow over me like a shallow wave. Plates arrived large enough to be aircraft carriers, each bearing a postage stamp of food arranged, as if the chef had been playing with tweezers. Vivienne cut her steak with the kind of elegance that pretends it is the first cut in history. $80 for a steak, she said into the air. But quality has its price. I nodded. I have always believed quality has its price. I just don't think you have to announce it before every bite. The evening unspooled in little threads of conversation. Lucas tried to talk about a project at work. Dominic interrupted to ask where I lived. Maya mentioned a gallery. Vivienne described a villa as if it were a person. She mentioned properties the way people mention pets, with far less intimacy. So Lucas tells us you live alone. Vivienne pivoted at last, turning to me with a concern that already had a verdict. That must be difficult, isn't it? At your age, on a limited salary. I let the trap close softly over my ankle and didn't flinch. I manage, I said. I save where I can. I don't need much. Oh, Alina. She breathed, voice syrup and steel. You are brave. Truly, some of us are called to do more with less. We did everything we could to give Maya the best. Private schools, travel, languages, so she could be comfortable. Now she has an excellent position, and we make sure to show our support. We helped with the down payment for their house. We paid for their honeymoon. Because that is what family does. She looked straight at me. Were you able to help with the wedding, or afterward? Her smile was careful. Her eyes were knives. I gave what I could. I said. A modest gift. How sweet. She murmured and went back to her wine. The rage that came over me wasn't the kind that screams or throws plates. It was the kind I've learned to trust. The cold river under ice, moving even when it appears still. I let her talk because people like Vivienne don't know how not to. The more they speak, the more they show, and I was collecting. At last, when dessert, a shimmering cube with a price that would cover a week's groceries for a family who waited for sales, was placed in front of her, Vivienne cleared her throat and put a new smile on. This was the speech she had planned in the car. Alana, she said. We should speak honestly, woman to woman. We adore Lucas. He is our son now, and we want him to have the stability he deserves. Stability, I asked and let the word sit. Financially, she said. Emotionally. We have always supported Maya. We will continue to support them both. But we also believe a young marriage shouldn't be burdened with worry. Do you understand? I believe I do, I said. She nodded, relieved. Good. Then you'll understand why we want to offer you a small monthly stipend. Not much. Something modest. Perhaps $500, $700. To ease your life. So Lucas doesn't feel obligated to take on extra responsibilities. In return, we'd ask that you give them space. Don't rely on them. Don't lean too hard. Let them build their life. Lucas made a sound like a kettle about to scream. Mom, you don't have to. Lucas, Maya murmured, laying a hand on his arm. She was shaking. I folded my napkin in half and placed it to the side of my plate. I took a sip of water. When I spoke, my voice had lost that quiet wobble on the edges. It was the voice I use when people twice my title fold their arguments in half and bring them to me to be unlabeled and folded properly. What a generous proposal, I said. Vivienne relaxed, her victory smile examined and placed. We do what we can. Family is everything. I have a few questions, I said softly. To be clear. Of course, she said, opening her palms as if she were showing they were empty. How much, precisely, were you imagining? 700, she said, meeting my eyes and finding them not as soft as before. Depending. So, 700 a month. I repeated, in exchange for my absence. She blinked. I wouldn't put it quite like that. I would. I said. That is what you offered. Elena. Dominic attempted, warning in his voice. You are twisting my wife's words. Am I? I turned toward him. I've watched you both all evening. You have spoken about what things cost and anything else you could purchase. But not once did you ask me what I love. How I spend my time, whether I am well or in pain. You did not ask how Lucas was raised, what we learned together, how many nights I sat awake, so that checks would clear and doctors would be paid, and my boy would not see any of it. You measured me and found me worth 700 a month. Vivienne's fork clinked against her plate. We were only trying to help. I believe you, I said. In your world, money is the first language, the second language, and the gospel that follows. But there is a difference between help and a purchase. She bristled, a glittering animal. We have always given without counting. We gave 40,000 toward their down payment. 15,000 for their honeymoon. We support our daughter without question. 40,000. I echoed. 15,000. You are right when you love your children, you don't hold back. But tell me, Vivienne, did that money buy respect? Did it buy love? Or did it buy obedience? The air changed. Lucas leaned forward, eyes wide. Maya stopped moving altogether. Dominic's jaw went hard. You are being unfair, he said. You're misreading our intentions. I'm reading them perfectly clearly. I placed my hands flat on the table. The nails were bare. The skin was clean and dry. These were ordinary hands. I would like to offer some context. You see, I didn't remain a clerk. I didn't stay in the first doorway that let me in and thank the wallpaper for the privilege. I studied at night. I learned on my lunch breaks. I taught myself what school wouldn't sell me, and what men wouldn't give me. I learned how to keep books and read budgets and navigate operations, when everyone who had done it before me held all the keys and dropped them only to their sons. Elena. Lucas said, voice shaking, what are you? I worked 12-hour days when you were in a playpen behind my chair, Lucas. I said, keeping my eyes on Vivienne. I changed your diapers in a bathroom at the public library, and did my English homework in the stall next door, while you hummed to yourself. A neighbor held you at her window, while I caught the 5:10 morning bus to be the first person at the office, and the last person out. I rose from a desk to a better desk to a cubicle to a glass office with a door that used to be locked when I passed by. Vivienne stared down at her plate. The diamonds on her wrist did not blink. I have been the regional head of operations for a multinational for nearly 20 years. I continued. I oversee teams in 5 countries. I am responsible for budgets in the hundreds of millions. When I sign my name, it means human beings in 3 time zones will have a paycheck on Friday. I do this every day, and for almost 2 decades my monthly salary has been $40,000. Maya's hand flew to her mouth. Lucas's fork slid off his plate and landed in his lap, and he didn't seem to notice. 40,000. Vivienne repeated. The words sounded like she had never practiced them. Before bonuses. Before stock. Before what I invested quietly, because the quieter money is, the better it grows. I chose not to speak about it, because Lucas did not need to know. I chose not to wear it on my body because I do not need to be a billboard for my balance sheet. I chose to live simply because it keeps my mind clear and, frankly, because the women who raised me believed that if you must shout about your money, perhaps it is because you don't have much else. Silence. The kind that happens in great halls when a judge enters, or in churches, when something holy has been said, by accident, and everyone goes still. Because they don't know what to do with what is true. Elena. Dominic said finally, pinching the bridge of his nose. Even if this is true. I raised an eyebrow. I reached into my canvas tote and placed a card on the table. It sang when it hit the wood, metal against wood, a bright small sound. Not black, which has lost its mystique to those who think they know. Transparent. Heavy. Vivienne recognized it instantly. Most people who care about such things can spot a centurion from across the room. She stared at it like it might spit. It is unseemly, she said. Voice brilliant. I agree, I said. Which is why I don't. But tonight, you have mistaken my quiet for lack, and that is your mistake to carry home. Dominic's jaw tightened. Regardless, he began, and I lifted a hand. The word you want is anyway, I said. Because what you meant to say was anyway. We still think the way we see the world is the way the world must be. You are generous, I'll grant you that. But you spoke to me this evening as though you were a princess descending the stairs to bless the peasants. You were condescending under the banner of care. You tried to buy my disappearance from my son's life for less than what you spent on dessert. Vivienne pushed her chair back and rose. I don't have to listen to this. You do not. I said. But before you leave, allow me to offer a counterproposal. Since we are being transactional, I will give you $1 million if you can show me one occasion. Just one. Where you extended kindness to someone who could not repay you. Not in a gala photo. Not for a tax receipt. One quiet kindness. Declaring it isn't necessary. I will know it when I see it. Vivienne opened her mouth and found nothing. Dominic stared at the salt shaker like it might whisper what to say. I gathered my napkin and set it by my plate. My hands were steady. Money doesn't buy class, I said. It doesn't buy curiosity. It doesn't buy a tender posture toward the lives of others. You have money, perhaps more than most, but you have none of what matters in rooms that aren't measuring you. Mum. Lucas said, voice soft and breaking. Why didn't you tell me? I turned to him then. All night I had intentionally not looked at my son for too long, not wanting to see his face as his mother performed a role that hurt him even as it taught him something. Because I wanted you to grow up without a safety net you couldn't help but notice, I said. Because I wanted you to find your own footing. Because people change when they know there is an invisible ladder just out of sight. I didn't want that for you. Maya swallowed and found a voice that sounded like slow water. But why this? She gestured to my dress, my bag, the persona I'd worn the whole evening. Why did you come, like this? Because I wanted to see how your parents treat someone they believe has nothing. I said, and now I know. Dominic pounded the table with 2 fingers, as though that would make a softer sound than his fist. Regardless of your intentions, you have humiliated us. You planned this. You cornered us. I set a table. I said. You chose the utensils. A waiter approached warily. Would you like anything else? He asked. Just the check, Dominic said through teeth. He handed over a card. Gold. Shiny in a way that is supposed to signal permanence and often doesn't. I sat back. Let the quiet stretch. Looked at Lucas long enough to let him see me without the mask. And when he realized what he was seeing, he looked at the woman he married, and then at the parents she came from and understood he was standing between 2 worlds and could choose. The waiter returned, voice gentle as bandages. I'm sorry, sir. It didn't go through. Vivienne's head snapped toward Dominic. What? There must be a block, he muttered, already reaching for another card. Travel. The bank. A second card. The same apology. Dominic stood and strode to the foyer, phone already at his ear, voice low and furious in whatever language he uses when he thinks he is alone. The table sat in an uneasy hush. Vivienne stared at the window but didn't see the city. Mom, I can. Lucas began, and I put a hand up. No, I said. You are not paying for this lesson. I put my transparent card on the small ceramic plate the waiter had left, and he handled it with something like reverence. Not for the card but for what it symbolized to him. He returned in less than 2 minutes with a receipt I didn't look at. Thank you, Miss Calderon, he said quietly. I picked up my canvas tote. Gray, worn, worth nothing to anyone but me. I stood and looked at Vivienne. You may keep the memory of tonight, I said. It will be more useful than any charity receipt. She didn't answer. Dominic returned pale. Security block, he announced, then looked at the signed receipt. You paid. I did, I said. Consider it a small stipend. 800 is it? Perhaps 9. Let's call it an even 8. You can pay me back in good manners when you acquire them. Lucas stood so quickly his chair tipped. Mom, he whispered. Let's go. We moved toward the door together, my boy a storm and a shelter. When the night air found us on the sidewalk, he grabbed my hand like he was 5 years old, and we were crossing a crowded street. Why did you do that? He asked. Why did you make them see? Because you asked me to come, I said. And I did not know who I would meet. Now I do. The city was a soft roar. Taxis honked. A couple argued in low voices across the street. The doorman pretended not to listen to anything. Everything was ordinary and enormous. I didn't know, Lucas said. About your job. About any of it. You didn't need to, I said. You needed to become yourself. He nodded. Told me he loved me like he needed to rehearse the sentence. I kissed his cheek and felt the rough of his recent shave. A car pulled up, lights like eyes. I had already called a ride. Mom, he said before I got in, will you ever forgive them? Forgiveness, I said, isn't a door you open out of pity. It's a road, and they haven't even stepped onto it. If they do, I'll meet them there. He nodded, eyes shining. I love you, he said. And I love you, I said. And then I was in the back seat of the car, and the city spilled itself toward home. The driver was older, with hands that had done more than steer. He glanced at me in the rear view, then back at the road. Long night, he asked. You could say that. I've been driving 20 years, he said, a smile ghosting his mouth. People get in with all sorts of faces. Yours says, I finally told the truth. I laughed, because it felt good to exhale something that wasn't armor. Maybe I did. Good, he said simply. The truth frees, even when it burns on the way out. He told me about his wife, gone 5 years, and the fights they had that turned into stories they told later to make each other laugh. He told me how she complained he was too blunt, and then loved him for the same reason. He told me how he has never once fallen asleep, thinking he hadn't said something he needed to say. I listened. The world is full of sermons disguised as small talk. Are you rich? He asked at a red light, eyes wrinkled at the corners as if he was smiling under his mustache. Depends on your definition, I said. If you mean money, yes. If you mean joy, peace, a son I love, and work that uses me up in a way that leaves more of me at the end of the day, yes again. Thought so, he said, and the light turned green. He dropped me in front of my old building, the stoop scrubbed clean every Saturday, by Mr. Alvarez, who refuses to let the city's dust settle on his steps. The driver looked up at the windows, then at me. You live here? He asked. I do. You're different, he said. In a good way. That, I said, is enough. I over-tipped him because sometimes generosity is the only language anyone needs, and he blinked too fast to swallow his gratitude with the dignity he preferred to wear. I went inside, climbed the stairs I've always taken instead of the elevator, because my knees are still young enough to climb, and opened my door to the quiet and the honest smell of home. Socks off, hair down, tea kettle on. I sat with the cup between my palms and stared out my small window at the slice of sky the city permits me to see. My phone hummed, a message from my assistant confirming a Monday briefing. A note from a colleague celebrating a contract I had closed with a signature and a smile. A text from an unknown number. It was Maya. Mother-in-law, I am sorry. I didn't know my parents would be like that. I need to talk to you, please. I stared at the words. Anger loosens even when you are not watching it. I didn't answer. Not yet. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because she needed time to figure out whether she wanted to apologize for the evening or apologize for what she had been taught. Those are different apologies, and only one changes anything. I slept as though someone had lifted something heavy off my chest. In the morning, the sun came as if it had come for me specifically. I made coffee, black and strong. I watched the city begin its rituals. Vendors rolling carts into place, dogs dragging their owners toward trees with the impatience of love, a girl practicing a dance routine on the stoop opposite. Life is rude and beautiful and indifferent. Lucas called. Mom, he said. Can we talk? Always. He told me he'd gone back inside after I left. He had run his thumb along his jaw the way he does when he is angry and trying to hold himself still. He told me that he told Vivienne and Dominic everything he had been too polite to say earlier. That their behavior had been cruel. That their generosity came with strings he refused to hold. That they would not dictate the temperature of his marriage. He told me Maya had cried. And then he told me she had spoken. That she had called her mother's words what they were, needlessly cutting. That she had said she was tired of measuring every human being by their receipts. He told me Vivienne had called her ungrateful. That Dominic had declared me manipulative, a woman who had set a trap and dragged them into it. And what did you say? I asked. I told them you did set a trap, he said, and that they fell into it, because they were exactly the kind of people you suspected they were, and I told them that I was done living afraid of their disapproval. We set boundaries. We were clear, and they slammed doors with words, he said. They said we would regret it. They said they would reconsider their will. I said I loved them. I told them to call when they were ready to love us, too. A pride can be quiet. It can be a warm thing that sits in your throat and makes finding words difficult. You did well, I said. He exhaled like an entire evening had just left his body. Maya wants to come see you, he said. Not today. Soon. When she is ready, she is welcome, I said. But only when she has something to say that isn't borrowed. After we hung up, I put on the kind of clothes that have listened to 1,000 errands and still don't complain. I walked. Sometimes you need the rhythm of your feet to make your brain remember that you are an animal made for movement, and not just a witness to the world's noise. At the park, I sat beside an old woman with a bag of bread and a coat older than my career. She fed the pigeons with the gravity of a priest. We spoke about nothing, which is to say we spoke about everything. Weather, the price of cooking oil, the way knees can predict rain, the way grief tries to make a home inside your bones, and how you must ask it to leave when it forgets itself. She told me that in 82 years she had learned one essential thing. People who have a lot and think that means they are a lot are never happy. She told me to watch the birds. How the glossy ones and the ragged ones eat the same crumbs with the same urgency. We should be more like pigeons, she said, without irony. We should be satisfied with the bread and the patch of sun. Then she left me with a smile that wrinkled her face into a map and a blessing I didn't know I had needed until the warmth of it settled on me. 3 days later, the bell rang. When I opened the door, Maya stood small, stripped of the careful armor she usually wears. No heels, no designer bag, no frost. She looked like a woman who had discovered she could choose another way to be, and was both terrified and relieved. May I come in? She asked. You may, I said, opening the door wider. She sat on my couch and looked around not as a critic, but as someone looking for clues. I don't know where to start. Start where it hurts, I said quietly. That is usually where the truth hides. She told me about growing up in a place without electricity and how the dark can teach you to fear everything you cannot hold. How her parents slept on the edge of survival for years and then vowed never to do so again. How they worked until the work would have broken many people. How the relief of money felt like oxygen after a lifetime of breathing through a straw. For them, she said, twisting her fingers together, money is medicine. Money is God. Money saved them, and they will not let it fall out of their hands. I nodded. Trauma teaches theology, I said. Sometimes the wrong one. She smiled sadly. I stayed quiet because silence was safer. If I disagreed, I was ungrateful. If I spoke up, I was disloyal. Every time I tried to draw a line, they moved it and then made me apologize for tripping. And then the other night, she swallowed. You took the tape off my mouth I didn't know I still had on. She asked me if her parents would ever change. I told her I do not sell miracles. I told her that people change when they are more in love with the future than with the past. Her parents were still deeply in love with their past, holding up its ugly face as proof for every kind thing they refused to learn. If they ever turned away from that love, they might find another one. If they didn't, they would live in their museum, dusting their trophies and reciting the mythology that made them saints in their own story. What can I do? She asked. You can refuse to worship their gods, I said. You can ask yourself why you want what you want and choose differently, slowly, without an audience. Start with small things. Ask, is this for me, or for my parents' eyes? Does this bring me peace, or does it just make a good picture? Then keep asking until the answers embarrass you, and then keep going until the answers don't. She nodded, tears running without drama. She apologized, but not the cheap apology that asks to be forgiven, because to be guilty is uncomfortable. She apologized like a woman naming what she did not do, knowing she will do better. We hugged, not the hug of in-laws posing for a holiday picture. The hug of two women who have both survived and know what it means to stop performing. When she left, the apartment was the same and I was different. Or perhaps I was more myself than I had been the night before. Life settled into something like rhythm. Vivienne and Dominic, from what I heard through the family grapevine, remained who they were. Which is to say, there were phone calls full of sighs that lasted entire paragraphs, and invitations extended with more caveats than kindness. We saw one another at birthdays and the holidays we agreed to share. I was polite. They were polished. None of us were fooled about anything important. At work, Monday arrived as it always does, wearing the face of 100 small tasks and one big decision. My assistant slid into my office like she always does, her notebook open to the list that organizes my life more kindly than any app could. Your husband called, she said. She blushes easily. It's endearing. I don't have a husband, I said, and she laughed. Oh, your son? My son, I said and smiled. Some names carry their own warmth. We discussed budgets and a plant in Mexico that needed an answer from me by close of business. I sent an email in a tone that has saved me more than once. I answered a call that will turn into a meeting, that will turn into a contract, that will turn into people being able to pay rent. And at the end of the day, I put my pen down, closed my laptop, locked the office that is not supposed to feel like a throne but often does, and walked out into air that belonged to nobody's company. The thing about telling the truth, even one night at a restaurant lit like a cathedral, is that it makes other truth telling easier. Not because it gets easier. It doesn't, always. But because your mouth remembers the shape of it. How it felt to wrap yourself around your own spine and not ask anyone else to hold you up. It's a kind of muscle memory. Weeks later, a cousin of Vivienne's cornered me at a family barbecue where the hamburgers were overcooked and the men stood around the grill like a sad fraternity. She slid into the space beside me as if she'd been practicing and began with the line, "Between us women," which is almost always a warning. "Between us women," she said. Couldn't you have let it go? Given Vivienne a little grace. She's proud. You wounded her. Grace isn't the same as deceit, I said, picking up a paper plate like a shield, and pride is tender only when it is confronted. The rest of the time, it's a bully. She pursed her lips. You think you're better than us. I think I am not less, I said. That's different. She sniffed and wandered away because some conversations aren't meant to end in applause. After that, word traveled. Families talk. They edit. They embellish. They choose the version that hurts least. I wasn't interested in correcting the legend. I had already told the only audience that mattered what was true. You want to know what happened to the money. It did what money should do when it is asked to behave. It sat quietly. It grew. It did not become my identity. It did not become my child's inheritance, while he was still learning which way a compass points. It paid for a neighbor's surgery, without her ever knowing where the envelope came from. It rebuilt a church that had been a shelter during a hurricane, and no longer needed a cross to be holy. Just food and cots and nurses and a generator. It sent a girl I didn't know to community college, because she wrote an essay that broke my heart open, and then gently put all the pieces back. Does Lucas know any of that? Not because I wanted him to praise me. Praise is air for some people. I am not one of them. But because he asked, finally, really asked, how I had decades of discipline inside my pocket and whether I would teach him. We began with a spreadsheet and a walk around my neighborhood. We looked at a building and talked about the people inside and why buying that building would make money and how that money had to move back into the block. If it wanted to call itself good, we drank coffee and argued about index funds versus hunches. He chose his path carefully. I closed my mouth when I needed it to stay closed. And Maya. She learned quickly. Not about money. On that front, she'd been advanced since 5. She learned that humility isn't shabby. That kindness is power. That silence can be strength if it isn't being used as a leash. She learned how to tell her mother, no, and not apologize afterward. She learned how to sit at my table with her shoes off while something simmered and tell me a decision without asking my permission for it. She learned that I would always tell her the truth, even if she didn't want to hear it. She asked me one day if I would be a grandmother who buys loud toys. I assured her I do not permit noise under my roof unless it is laughter. As for Vivienne and Dominic, the most I can offer you is this. Trauma taught them to worship a God that doesn't care about them. They pray still. Their faith is deep. It is hard to leave a church where your face is in every stained glass window. But I have seen the tiniest glimmer. On a day when a storm knocked out power on their street, Dominic tipped the young kid who was handing out free ice at the corner store with a 20s he didn't count. He tried to pretend it was nothing. It was not nothing. The gods don't like to be cheated on. He may try again. Months after the dinner, I was on a plane between cities that claim me professionally, but not personally. I keep my ring finger bare on purpose. It is a ring of its own. The flight attendant moved down the aisle offering bottled water and pretzels. She looked like a girl who had slept in a different bed every night for a week and was not accustomed to trusting the pillows. She handed me a bottle with 2 hands the way small children hand you flowers they had to reach for. I remember you, she said quietly. From that restaurant, I was the hostess. I saw everything. Her eyes were not curious. They were grateful. Did you? I asked. I wasn't sure anyone was watching. We were, she said. We always are. We see who is kind when no one is keeping score. Thank you, I said, and she smiled the kind of smile that knows it's been seen and can exhale. When the plane landed, I stepped into another city that needs me because I still have something to build. I walked into another conference room with a table, so long it could host a dinner inside a war. I sat and listened and used my voice exactly where it would change something. I left with another signature that meant rent on Fridays and babies with medicine and parents who could say yes to field trip permission slips without checking their bank balance. And sometimes, when the day had been too long and the mask of competence had set too hard on my face, I went home in my own city, cooked rice and eggs and scallions and ate out of the bowl with the chip near the lip. I sat with my back against the couch and my feet tucked up under me like a girl, and I watched a show that didn't require me to be clever. I texted my son ridiculous memes. I answered Maya's questions about the cut of a dress. Not what it cost, but whether it would make her feel like herself. And when the night asked me if I had any regrets, I told it no, and I didn't have to convince myself I was telling the truth. At some point, you have to decide what wealth means. For a long time, it meant safety. Then it meant proof. Then, once I had enough, it became a tool and then a question: what do I want to build with this? A life that looks good from the porch? Or a life that feels good in the small hours? I chose the latter. It will not make a magazine spread. It will not be whispered about at the club. But it will make a son who can look at himself in the mirror and a daughter-in-law who will teach her children to be brave in different ways than she learned. I used to think that the thing I was proudest of was my title. Then, for a while, It was the number of zeros after a number on a statement I only looked at on Sundays when I felt like a detective. Now, when you ask me what I am proud of, I will tell you this: that I didn't let money make me loud when it wanted me to, that I used it to make people shiver less in winter, that I kept my word to myself about who I would be when no one was looking. A year after the night with the check, we gathered again. Birthday cake for someone whose candles could have set the house on fire if he had been allowed to blow them all out. There was family. There was almost family. There were neighbors, because in our world, neighbors are kin without the paperwork. Vivienne arrived in a navy dress that flattered her body like it had been sewn for her by someone who loved her. She brought flowers. She did not bring an apology. She did not need one that day. She watched me carry a sleeping child into a bedroom and lay him down with tenderness that does not check where the parents came from. She followed me into the kitchen under the pretense of helping and stood there with her hands on a dish towel she didn't use. "Alana," she said finally, voice bare as a wrist without jewels. "You love him." "I do," I said. "And I love you when I can." She nodded. "I don't know how to be another way," she confessed. "I am trying." "I know," I said, because I did. Trying counts, not at the bank, with people. She laughed softly, a sound I hadn't heard from her that didn't feel like a performance. For a moment, the world we had built between us felt like a room with a window cracked open, letting in air neither of us had known we needed. Do I still carry that canvas tote? Yes. It has been stitched back together along the bottom seam twice now, and I will keep stitching it until it has more thread than original fabric, because that feels like a metaphor I like. Do I still live in the same apartment? For now. If I move, it won't be because I need more closet space for dresses I don't buy. It will be because I found a place with more light. That is a currency I have learned to respect more than status. At the end of all of this, if you asked me why I did what I did 2 years ago in a room with linen napkins and a check that tried to embarrass me, I would tell you this: sometimes the only way to teach people how to see is to make them look. I made them look that night. At me. More importantly, at themselves. What they saw was their business. What I saw was enough to make me stop carrying the burden of what strangers might believe about my life. And Lucas, he knows me now. Not the number on a pay stub. Me, he has slowly, painfully, tenderly untangled his sense of worth from the applause of other people. He is a good husband. He is learning how to be a father, one who does not measure his children with rulers he inherited. He calls me sometimes from a grocery store aisle to ask if the generic brand of beans tastes the same as the other. And I always tell him yes and smile, because some lessons can be learned for 99 cents. If you have read this far, perhaps you are waiting for a moral that can be printed on a tea towel. I don't have one. I have a life. It is as simple and as complicated as all lives. I will say this: if you ever find yourself seated at a table with people who lilt their insults so sweetly you aren't sure whether to thank them, know this: the size of your wallet is not a shield, nor is it an apology. It is a tool. You get to choose whether it builds a prison or a window. That night, I chose a window, for me, for Lucas, and, whether they admit it or not, for Vivienne and Dominic. And when I am very old and the bank has stopped caring, because there is nothing left for me to buy, I will sit by a window with a cup of tea, and remember a table with a bright white tablecloth, and a check that tried to humiliate me, and did not. I will think of the old woman in the park with her bread and her pigeons. I will think of a taxi driver and his honest marriage. I will think of a son who grew up to be a man I am proud to know. I will think of a young woman who learned to tell the truth, even when it made her mother furious. I will think of a world that allowed all of us to be better than we were raised to be, even for a moment. That, to me, is wealth.